Morning, church. The year was 2008. And this is what I looked like. Laughter? Are you laughing at me? You should. My hair was huge. I was a senior in college, and one of my best friends, Corey, threatened to punch me in the face. And because he was a good friend, he gave me plenty of notice. He told me that I had until Friday. And if by Friday I hadn't finally asked Blythe out on a date, instead of just talking and talking about it, he was going to punch me in the face. And at first I thought he was joking, but it was pretty clear that he was serious. The problem is, I didn't know how. I was very new to the intimidating world of dating. And if you know me, this may shock you, but I wasn't exactly smooth and suave around women. I had never had a girlfriend before. I had just gone on my first date a few months prior, and while there wasn't a second date with that particular young woman, I had built up enough confidence that I had told Corey, I think I'm going to ask Blythe out on a date. She was friends with my roommate's girlfriend, but my roommate didn't know her that well, but both Corey and Blythe were art majors. So I kept asking about her, running plans and ideas, how I was going to go about this, and that's when he threatened to punch me. He said, "Mike, just ask her already, and do it by Friday, or I'm going to punch you in the face." Call that extra incentive. Well, Monday came around, and I had a plan. My plan was that I was going to ask her on Tuesday, because I knew that she worked on Tuesday. On Tuesdays, I would always go to the grocery store where she worked, and I would buy a half gallon of juice. I did not drink that much juice in a week, but it was my excuse to go through her line. And that's when I was going to ask her on a date, on my weekly juice run. Very romantic idea, I know. I hadn't figured out what I was going to say to her just yet. I'm going to be like, "Hey, Blythe, orange juice is good, but how about we get coffee instead?" Yeah, fortunately, that's not how it happened. That Monday, I actually ran into her right after morning chapel. And that's perfect, right? I didn't have to wait until Tuesday. The looming punch threat would be cleared. But about 7.3 seconds into my conversation with her, I chickened out. I decided this wasn't the right time, that I would still go forward with the Tuesday juice plan, which I could then spend the rest of Monday obsessively preparing in my mind. But that is when Blythe saved me. Because it turns out she had found me. And without any juice involved at all, asked me if I wanted to go on a date with her. Yeah. So after I picked my jaw off the floor, I said, "Yes. How about Tuesday?" Nope, she had to work. Turns out she wasn't scheduled to work that day after all. Oh, okay, well, how about tonight? Well, she was free. So, on Monday, October 27th, 2008, Blythe and I had our first date. And I think it went pretty well. And to this day, I still haven't been punched in the face. That is not an invitation. Just want to make that clear. It wasn't because of me, but because Blythe was bold and took the initiative to act rather than passively waiting. And this wasn't the last time either. We need people like that in our lives. And God must have known that that was true for me, for which I am very, very grateful. Because I suffer from what I call paralysis by analysis. And she has helped me with this over the years, even at restaurants where I take way too long staring at the menu to decide what I want. And unlike Corey, she has not threatened to punch me in the face just yet. But I have to wonder, as I look at my life, How many opportunities in life have slipped away because I didn't have the courage or the decisiveness to act because I was afraid? One of the recurring messages that we see throughout the Bible is to be bold, to be strong and courageous, and to not be paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. And we're going to see that today as we continue to look at the book of Ruth. We are in chapter 3 of this story today, a story of redemption. If you're unfamiliar with Ruth, and if you weren't here for the last 2 lessons, I'll quickly recap. The story of Ruth begins with Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, who were both widows living in Moab. Naomi was an Israelite, and with nothing left in Moab, she returned home to Bethlehem. And despite being a Moabite, a foreigner, Ruth vowed to stay by Naomi's side wherever she went, demonstrating to Naomi faithful love. In chapter 2, Ruth just so happened to meet Boaz, who just so happened to be her guardian redeemer, a relative that was expected to support widowed family members, and someone that could lift her out of this life of poverty. And he just so happened to be a really nice guy that liked Ruth. Both Naomi and Ruth realized that this was more than just mere coincidence, but a sign of God's faithful love. But in response to it, they were going to have to act decisively and take the initiative to act. And this is where we pick up in chapter 3. I'll begin reading in verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours, and tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. And then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he's finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. And when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. And Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. And he turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer for our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night. And in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." And when she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. And then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" And then she told everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.' And then Naomi said, 'Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today.'" So we started off this series by talking about Naomi. For it is just as much her story as it is Ruth's. In fact, some have argued that it is actually Naomi that is the main character of the story, for it begins and ends with her. And Naomi's story arc has been a roller coaster so far, going from lamenting and grieving to hoping and to now planning. That series of coincidences we saw last week made it evident to her that not only was God present and faithful, but that God's will was for Ruth to be with Boaz, and that this was how God was going to lift them out of their despair. This was the way God was going to answer their prayers. Naomi knew, though, that God wasn't just going to coincidence them all the way, as if Boaz was going to just so happen to propose marriage. They needed to act. And that is where Naomi's plan came in. And what happens next is kind of a strange story. It's not the strangest one in the Bible, but it's also not the easiest one to preach. Because there's a whole lot of cultural references that don't really translate well to us here 3,000 years later. But conversely, there's the temptation to read our cultural references into the text that aren't really there. I don't have time to unpack it all right now. But the most important part of the chapter, which you may not have picked up on, is that Ruth essentially proposed to Boaz. In verse 9, when Ruth told Boaz, "Spread the corner of your garment over me," she was basically saying, get down on one knee and put a ring on it. That was bold. It's not something a lot of women did in that time and place. And it was incredibly risky, depending on how Boaz was going to react to it. It could have gone very poorly for her. But fortunately, Boaz was a man of valor, or of noble character, as the NIV translated it. This is how he's introduced in Ruth chapter 2, using a Hebrew word often used to describe someone of outstanding character that people should look up to as an example. People would have told their sons, "Be like Boaz." But here in chapter 3, Boaz points out that everyone already said that about Ruth as well. In verse 11, she is called a woman of valor, a woman of noble character. People would have told their daughters, "Be like Ruth." I mentioned 2 weeks ago that the Hebrew Bible places the book of Ruth after the book of Proverbs, which ends by talking about the wife of noble character. Ruth is the perfect example of the Proverbs 31 woman, and Boaz saw that in her. He saw in her not just her kindness and faithful love, but also her determination, her courage, and her boldness. Men and women of valor are people who dare to act. They know what is right, and they don't hesitate to do what is right, even if there are risks involved. They don't keep going back and forth. They don't wait until it's too late. And they don't expect God to do all the work either. We've noted already in this series that God doesn't actually do anything in this story, at least compared to how God works and intervenes in many other stories in the Bible. God doesn't speak from the heavens. He doesn't demonstrate signs and wonders. But without a doubt, God is present here. Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz have all seen the hand of God at work in their lives, and yet the hand of God points them, but it doesn't push them. There have been unexplainable coincidences so far, but that was not how the story was going to resolve. Their happily ever after wasn't going to just magically and coincidentally appear. Naomi and Ruth both had the boldness to take matters into their own hands, and both of them were rewarded for it. The story isn't over yet. We'll reach its conclusion next week, as Boaz has revealed a little complication, that there's another guardian redeemer And this is another one of those cultural references that I won't fully unpack right now, but essentially the guardian redeemer, or kinsman redeemer as it's sometimes translated, was someone that would marry the widow of a relative to make sure that they were protected and taken care of, but also to have children with them so that the family line would continue. And Boaz acknowledged that he was one of the guardian redeemers for Ruth's late husband's family, but he revealed that there was another one that was more closely related to her. And by their customs in that culture, that man had first right to marry Ruth and redeem her. But Boaz vowed that if he wasn't willing, he would redeem Ruth himself. But not just her. Boaz would not just be the redeemer of Ruth, but he would redeem Naomi as well. And if it's true that Naomi is the main character of the story, she needs to have a happy ending too. This chapter ends with Ruth returning to Naomi to report on how her plan had gone. And not only had it gone well, but Boaz had remembered Naomi and sent Ruth with something around 60 pounds of barley, saying, "Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed." Naomi had not been forgotten, not by Ruth, not by Boaz, and certainly not by God. Yes, there are risks involved. There are risks in life, but that is not one of them. God was never leaving her side. We may not know what happens next, but we know that whatever it is, God's faithful love will be present with us. And I love Naomi's response that speaks to this. Well, I don't have it up there, but it is wait until you find out what happens. Just you wait. And we will see that next week. After last week's lesson, I encourage you to share stories of coincidences in your life that helped you to understand and to be aware of God's faithful presence in your life. And many of you did. You shared them with me. And I'm grateful for that. Share them with others too. Because those stories are very encouraging. But like we saw today, we can't just let those stories make us feel good and that's it. Instead, they should give us the confidence and encouragement to do something about it. If we believe that God is present with us, that God is faithfully by our side, and also that God isn't passively waiting at work, but is actively at work in this world, what is stopping us from daring to act and work out our faith? God is here in our midst, and we have nothing to fear. I say this every week, at the end of every sermon, that this is the gospel we are preaching and the good news we are proclaiming not just with our words, but with our lives. Church, we are proclaiming the gospel by daring to act. God is present with us, and that is very, very good news. But God is calling us to do something about it, to live differently. And what does that mean? What is it? What is God calling us to do? Well, that's not something that I can answer for you. But God, in God's hand, has given us plenty of pointers, though. And more than that, God has given us community. Do you have someone in your life encouraging you to dare to act? Hopefully, it's not with a punch in the face. But the book of Hebrews tells us that one of the reasons that the church meets every week is to consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. And sometimes that is risky. And sometimes that's hard. But we are able to do that because God is with us and God is giving us the strength and power to demonstrate God's love and goodness to the world. And that is my prayer for us today. May we dare to act on God's love. And if you want to know more about the God who is here with us, we would love to tell you more about him and how you could be one of his followers. And if you are in need of prayer or encouragement, or if you need some spurring on, let us know. And in all things, may God receive all glory and honor and praise. Amen.